What if I told you that the company that sold America the fantasy of perfect femininity was actually run by men who treated women like commodities? What if the brand that promised to make you feel beautiful and empowered was built on a foundation of exploitation, toxic masculinity, and connections to one of the most notorious predators in modern history? Welcome to the real story of Victoria's Secret, where angels had clipped wings, and the only thing more manufactured than the push-up bras was the lie they sold to the world. This isn't just about overpriced lingerie. This is about how a company built an empire on female insecurity, protected predators in executive suites, and when the reckoning came, they tried to rebrand their way out of accountability. In this video, we're opening the file they prayed would stay buried forever. Meet Roy Raymond, Stanford MBA, marketing genius, and the man who would convince America that buying lingerie should feel like entering a Victorian gentleman's club. Picture this. It's 1977. Raymond walks into a department store to buy lingerie for his wife. The fluorescent lights, uncomfortable saleswomen, embarrassed husbands shuffling through racks of cotton briefs. Raymond feels emasculated. Most people would think, well, that was awkward, but Raymond, he saw an opportunity. Raymond didn't just want to sell lingerie. He wanted to sell fantasy. He wanted to create a world where men could shop for women's underwear without feeling like perverts, and where women would pay premium prices to feel like objects of desire. His genius wasn't fashion, it was psychological manipulation wrapped in silk and lace. Raymond opened the first Victoria's Secret store with $80,000 borrowed money. The store was designed like a Victorian boudoir. Dark wood, soft lighting, and that distinctive aesthetic that whispered classy while screaming objectification. But here's the twist. Raymond sold the company just 5 years later to Leslie Wexner for $1 million. Why? He was hemorrhaging money. Turns out most women weren't interested in shopping for lingerie and what felt like a creepy Victorian fever dream designed by and for men. Raymond had created the concept, but he fundamentally misunderstood his own customer base. He thought he was selling to women, but he was really selling to male fantasies about women. Enter Leslie Wexner, the man who would turn Raymond's failing fantasy into a cultural phenomenon and a nightmare. Leslie Wexner wasn't just a businessman. He was a master of consumer psychology who understood something Raymond didn't. If you want women to buy your fantasy, you need to make them believe it's their fantasy too. Wexner took Victoria's Secret and did something brilliant and sinister. He convinced women that buying his products wasn't about male approval. It was about female empowerment. The marketing was surgical in its precision. Gone were Raymond's Victorian gentleman's club aesthetics. In came the angels. Beautiful, unattainable women who made every customer believe that if they just bought the right bra, they too could be transformed. The Victoria's Secret fashion show became appointment television. Millions of women watched models with impossible bodies strut down runways in wings and diamonds, selling the lie that this was what empowerment looked like. But behind the glitter and glamour, Wexner was building something much darker. The models weren't just advertising products, they were products themselves. Former models described a culture of toxic control. They were told to lose weight when they were already underweight. They were given numbers to call if they were struggling with their eating. They were pressured to maintain impossible standards while being told it was all about health and wellness. Ed Razek, the company's chief marketing officer, became the face of this toxic culture. He decided which models were worthy of the Victoria's Secret brand, and his decisions often seemed to have more to do with his personal preferences than business strategy. Razek once famously said that the brand couldn't include transgender or plus-size models because the show is a fantasy. The fantasy, apparently, was very specific. Young, thin, conventionally attractive women performing femininity for male approval while being told it was empowerment. But the real darkness was just beginning to surface. Here's where our story takes a turn that sounds too insane to be true. Leslie Wexner, the man who controlled America's largest lingerie empire, was also Jeffrey Epstein's only known client. Let that sink in. Jeffrey Epstein, the man who would later be exposed as one of the most notorious sex traffickers in modern history, managed the personal finances of the man who built his fortune on selling female sexuality. For over a decade, Epstein had power of attorney over Wexner's affairs. He could sign Wexner's name, make financial decisions, and had access to private jets, multiple homes, and unlimited resources. The official story? Wexner was just a naive billionaire who got taken advantage of by a charming financial advisor. But investigators and journalists have raised uncomfortable questions about this narrative. How does someone become the financial advisor to one of America's richest men without any significant track record? How does a relatively unknown money manager gain power of attorney over billions in assets? And why did this relationship continue for so long? Former Victoria's Secret employees began speaking out about uncomfortable incidents. Models described being approached by Epstein at company events. There were stories of young women being recruited for modeling opportunities that seemed to have little to do with actual modeling. The most disturbing revelation came from Maria Farmer, one of Epstein's victims, who alleged that Epstein specifically targeted young women in the fashion industry, using his connections to legitimate modeling agencies and brands as cover for his predatory behavior. When the Epstein scandal finally broke, Wexner claimed he was shocked and sickened by the revelations. He said he had severed ties with Epstein years earlier. But the damage was done. The man who had built his empire on selling female sexuality had been intimately connected to a man who trafficked women and girls. The questions remain. What did Wexner know? And when did he know it? And how many women paid the price for his willful blindness? By 2018, the cultural winds had shifted. The Me Too movement was exposing toxic workplace cultures across industries, and Victoria's Secret was squarely in the crosshairs. The company that had built its brand on female empowerment was revealed to be one of the most toxic workplaces for women in corporate America. Former employees described a culture of harassment, discrimination, and body shaming. The company was accused of promoting a boys' club atmosphere, where women were valued primarily for their appearance and their willingness to stay silent about abuse. The Victoria's Secret fashion show, once the crown jewel of the brand, became a symbol of everything wrong with the company's approach to women. Ratings plummeted as consumers began to see through the fantasy. In 2019, Ed Razek was forced to retire after his comments about transgender and plus-size models sparked widespread outrage. But the real reckoning came when journalists began investigating the Epstein connection more deeply. The New York Times published a devastating exposé detailing the toxic culture at Victoria's Secret and raising serious questions about Wexner's relationship with Epstein. Suddenly, the company that had sold empowerment was exposed as a boys' club that had exploited women for decades. Sales plummeted. The brand that had once been synonymous with sexy became synonymous with scandal. The Angels, once the most coveted modeling gig in the world, became a symbol of outdated, toxic masculinity. In 2020, Wexner announced he was stepping down as CEO. The man who had built Victoria's Secret into a global empire was finally being held accountable for the culture he had created. But was it too little, too late? Victoria's Secret's response to the scandal was as predictable as it was hollow. A complete rebrand. Out went the Angels. In came the VS Collective, a group of diverse women who were supposed to represent the brand's new commitment to inclusivity and empowerment. The company hired its first female CEO, made promises about diversity and inclusion, and launched advertising campaigns that seemed designed more for damage control than authentic change. But here's the thing about trying to rebrand your way out of accountability. It only works if people believe you've actually changed. The new Victoria's Secret campaigns featured plus-size models, older women, and athletes. The messaging was all about real beauty and authentic empowerment. But for many consumers, it felt like lipstick on a pig. You can't spend decades building a brand on toxic masculinity and female objectification, then suddenly pivot to feminism and expect people to forget your history. The rebrand felt hollow because it was hollow. It was a marketing strategy, not a moral awakening. Meanwhile, the fundamental questions about the Epstein connection remained unanswered. Wexner's departure didn't erase the decades of enabling that had happened under his leadership. So what's the real legacy of Victoria's Secret? It's not the lingerie, the fashion shows, or even the scandal. It's the lesson that when we buy into fantasies of empowerment sold by men who profit from female insecurity, we're not just buying products, We're buying into our own exploitation. Victoria's Secret succeeded because it convinced women that objectification was empowerment, that performing sexuality for male approval was feminism, and that buying their products was an act of self-love. But the most uncomfortable truth is this: Victoria's Secret didn't create these toxic ideas about female sexuality and empowerment. It just monetized them. Every time we see a brand promising to make us feel beautiful, sexy, or empowered, we should ask, who's really being empowered here? And what fantasy are they selling us? Because in the end, the real secret behind Victoria's Secret is that there was never anything secret about it at all. The exploitation was always hiding in plain sight. We just chose not to see it. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and turn on notifications so you never miss a future upload. Up next, the dark secrets behind Shein's fashion empire. A deep dive into the stolen designs, exploited workers, and environmental damage behind their rise. Thanks for watching.